"Grandma, my parents are going to take all your money." The words fell from her lips like shards of glass, sharp enough to cut through the silence of the living room. I froze. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly. The ceiling fan hummed above us, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. My granddaughter's eyes were wide, trembling with a truth too heavy for someone so young. I leaned in closer. "What did you just say?" I whispered, though I already knew I hadn't misheard. Her small hands clutched the edge of the couch, her knuckles white. She looked at me like someone who had discovered a dangerous secret, but wasn't sure if it was safe to share. "They said you don't need all that money. They said you're too old to make decisions now. They're planning to take it." "Grandma, all of it." A chill spread through my chest. Though the room was warm, my own children, the ones I had raised with sacrifice, the ones I had fed when there wasn't enough food, the ones I had sent to school even when I wore the same pair of shoes until they fell apart. My children, plotting against me. I tried to swallow the lump rising in my throat. Anger, disbelief, betrayal, all of it mixed like a storm inside me. I wanted to deny it, to brush it off as a child's misunderstanding. But the way my granddaughter's voice cracked told me this wasn't imagination. This was truth. I reached for her hand, my fingers trembling. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered. She nodded, eyes filling with tears, as if she knew the weight of the battle she had just dragged me into. The living room around us seemed different now. The walls that once felt safe now felt like they were listening. The photographs of smiling faces hanging above us looked almost mocking. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. But beneath the hurt, a fire flickered. They thought I was weak. They thought my age made me powerless. They thought greed would blind me. They were wrong. And that's when I realized I had to make a plan. For years, the gatherings had looked so ordinary: warm lights, clinking dishes, laughter that floated across the table. If a stranger walked in, they would have seen a family that appeared whole, united, unshakable. I played my part well, the smiling matriarch, the provider who made sure every holiday had too much food, every birthday had gifts stacked high, every graduation was followed by envelopes quietly slipped into palms. That was who I had always been. I remember last Thanksgiving. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. My children arrived with their spouses, their voices booming with cheer. They kissed my cheek and told me how good I looked, how proud they were of me, how lucky they were to have such a mother. Their words wrapped around me like silk. But underneath, I had already begun to notice the frayed edges. When the plates were cleared, I caught one of them, my eldest son, lingering at the kitchen counter, whispering to his sister about how much the house must be worth now. Another time, my daughter-in-law eyed the antique china cabinet, running her hand along the glass as though she were already planning where it would stand in her own home. These weren't casual glances. These were assessments, silent claims being staked on things that were not yet theirs. Still, I gave. At Christmas, I tucked crisp bills into red envelopes for each of them. When one of them came to me asking for help with a car payment, I didn't hesitate. When another hinted that their mortgage was crushing them, I wrote a check. They thanked me, hugged me, and left with smiles so wide they could have lit up the whole neighborhood. But I noticed something: none of them asked how I was doing. Not once. I brushed it off then. I told myself that maybe this was what family was: give and give, and don't expect too much in return. I told myself they loved me, even if their love was wrapped in selfishness. But in the quiet moments after everyone left, when I was alone with the dishes and the faint smell of candles, I sometimes wondered. Their compliments felt rehearsed, their gratitude fleeting. They looked at me the way hunters look at prey, admiring, but only because they are calculating what they will gain. Still, I try to silence those thoughts. Mothers don't want to believe their children could betray them. I wanted to hold on to the illusion that all the laughter, all the smiles, were real. And for a while, it worked. The routine continued. Sunday dinners, holiday visits, phone calls that came less often than they should have, but always seemed sweet enough when they did. From the outside, nothing looked broken. From the inside, though, the cracks were already spreading. Looking back now, I see it so clearly. The jokes about my age, the way they insisted on helping with my finances, the little comments about how life would be easier if things were in their names. They thought they were subtle. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed every glance, every slip of the tongue, every smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. At the time, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the truth was simple. The storm was already gathering on the horizon, and though the skies above still looked calm, I felt it in my bones something was coming. Something that would shatter the illusion forever. Everything was about to change. Greed is never born in a single moment. It grows quietly, like a weed, until it chokes everything around it. My children's hunger for what I had built did not begin with my granddaughter's warning. It had been simmering for years, buried under the thin disguise of family smiles and polite words. When they were younger, I excused their entitlement as youthful selfishness. My eldest son, Daniel, always believed the world owed him something. He was clever, ambitious, but never satisfied. If he earned a promotion, he complained about the pay. If he bought a car, he envied the neighbor's newer model. My sacrifices to put him through college were quickly forgotten, replaced with his endless belief that he deserved more. Then there was my daughter, Melissa, charming on the outside, but always calculating. She was the type who never offered help, without first asking what she would gain in return. I remembered once, when her younger brother was in trouble at school, she refused to stick up for him unless I promised her a new dress. She learned early that manipulation worked, and she never let that lesson go. The conflicts grew sharper as the years passed. When their father died, I saw it in their eyes at the funeral, not grief alone, but calculation. They whispered about life insurance payouts, about what would happen to the house. I was still mourning, but they were already planning. Behind closed doors, their conversations turned darker. My granddaughter only overheard pieces of it, but I can imagine the rest, because I know the way they think. Mom doesn't need all that space anymore, Daniel would say, his voice dripping with impatience. She can barely mow the lawn, let alone keep up with the bills. We'd be doing her a favor taking over, Melissa would counter. Not just the house. She's sitting on savings, retirement accounts, life insurance. Everything Dad left behind. Do you know how much easier our lives would be if we just had access to it now? Their spouses joined in, encouraging the talk. One of them even joked that I should be in assisted living already, as if I were nothing more than a burden to be shuffled aside. They laughed, but beneath the laughter was a plan. The arrogance in their voices was staggering. They spoke as though my hard work was theirs by birthright, as if the long nights I spent scrubbing floors, the decades I spent pinching pennies, the sacrifices I made to keep food on the table, meant nothing. In their eyes, I was simply holding on to what would one day be theirs. Why wait? Why not take it now? They saw me as fragile, dependent, easy to outmaneuver. They thought age had dulled my senses, that I no longer noticed their scheming glances, or the way they circled my belongings. Like vultures, at family gatherings, they smiled in my face, but behind my back, they whispered about power of attorney, about shifting accounts, about how to corner me into handing it all over. Their greed blinded them. They didn't see the granddaughter watching quietly from the corner, hearing their words and feeling the unease I had pushed aside for too long. They didn't realize that by underestimating me, they had already made their first mistake. I sometimes wonder if they believed their own lies, that they were helping me, that I couldn't be trusted with my own life anymore. Greed has a way of disguising itself as concern. They wore that mask well, but beneath it, the truth was rotten. It wasn't love that motivated them. It wasn't worrying. It was hunger, and hunger like that only grows. Every time they saw me write a check to cover a grandchild's school fees, they calculated how much less there would be for them. Every time I donated to the church or gave money to a neighbor in need, they whispered that I was wasting their inheritance. They had stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was nothing more than a vault, a safe to be cracked open. But here is the mistake greedy people always make. They confuse kindness for weakness. They thought my quiet nature, my giving hands, my tired smile meant I was defenseless. They believed they were circling an old woman too weary to fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with, because while they plotted in whispers and exchanged greedy smiles, they never expected that the weakest person in the room would become their biggest problem. Before I was the grandmother sitting quietly in that living room, I was a girl with nothing but calloused hands and a stubborn will to survive. Life never gave me shortcuts. I was born into a world where every grain of rice mattered, where every coin had to be stretched until it screamed. My parents were poor, but they were proud. They taught me that dignity was worth more than gold, and that hard work was the only inheritance they could leave behind. When I married, I believed I had found my partner for life. We had dreams, small ones, humble ones, a little house, healthy children, food on the table. For a time, it felt possible. But then fate took him from me too soon. One car accident, one phone call, and suddenly I was a widow with 3 children staring up at me, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Their father was gone. The bills weren't. The debts weren't. The hunger certainly wasn't. So I worked. Lord, how I worked. By day, I scrubbed offices where no one remembered my name. By night, I stitched clothes until my fingers bled. I sold bread at the market before dawn, then rushed home to pack school lunches. There were nights I went to bed with an empty stomach, just to make sure my children didn't. And when the tears threatened to come, I swallowed them. My children couldn't see me break. They needed to believe their mother was made of steel. There were moments I thought I would collapse. Once, I fainted while carrying laundry up the stairs, the weight too much for my tired body. My youngest son cried, begging me not to leave like his father had. I promised him I wouldn't, and I kept that promise. Every time life tried to bury me, I clawed my way back to the surface. Piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice, I built something out of nothing. The tiny apartment gave way to a modest house. The debt shrank. My children graduated in gowns I had prayed over 1,000 times. I didn't give them luxury, but I gave them stability. Every meal, every school book, every roof over their heads came from my sweat. And I wasn't just a provider, I was their shield. When they were mocked for being fatherless, I stood taller. When the world told them they would fail, I told them they could rise. I taught them to never let anyone steal their dignity. Ironically, it was those very lessons they seemed to forget as they grew older. Still, I pressed on. I put away what little I could. I clipped coupons, patched old clothes, and saved every dollar that wasn't immediately needed. I didn't save for me, I saved for them. I wanted them to have the lives I had only dreamed of: education, opportunity, freedom from the chains of poverty. But here is the truth no one tells you about sacrifice. It carves you into something sharper. You become a weapon without realizing it. Each hardship is a whetstone, each struggle a hammer that forges strength in silence. On the outside, people saw a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. On the inside, I was a fortress. I remember the first time someone called me fragile. It was after I turned 60. My son laughed when I tried to carry groceries, taking the bag from my hand. "Careful, Mom," he said. "You're not as strong as you used to be." I smiled and let him believe it. What he didn't know was that I had once carried the weight of an entire family on my back. Compared to that, groceries were nothing. They mistook my quietness for weakness, my age for irrelevance. But every scar on my hands, every wrinkle on my face, was proof that I had survived battles they could never imagine. I had walked through fire and come out breathing. What were their greedy schemes compared to the storms I had already weathered? When my granddaughter whispered that warning, something inside me shifted. For a moment, the weight of betrayal pressed heavy on my chest. But then I remembered who I was. I wasn't just a grandmother. I was the woman who had fought poverty with bare fists and won. I was the mother who had built a life from ashes. I was the survivor who had never bowed to despair. So yes, they thought I was too old, too soft, too naive. They thought they could steal from me without resistance. They thought they held all the power because I was just grandma. But they didn't understand the truth. The very struggles that had nearly broken me were the ones that had made me unbreakable. And those same sacrifices gave me the weapon they never saw coming. The table was set the way it always had been. China plates polished, silverware gleaming, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. My grandchildren giggled at their end of the table, unaware of the storm brewing just a few seats away. It should have been a peaceful evening, a family united over food. But peace had long since abandoned this house. It began innocently enough, with Melissa pouring wine into her glass. She raised it with a smile that was just a little too sharp. "To Mom," she said, her voice laced with sugar, for still managing to put together such a beautiful meal. At her age, the words hung in the air, half compliment, half dagger. My sons chuckled, and even her husband smirked. I kept my smile steady, refusing to let the sting show. Daniel leaned back in his chair, carving into his chicken with deliberate slowness. "You know, Mom, I was reading an article the other day about how people over 70 shouldn't be handling complex finances anymore. Too stressful, too confusing. I mean, don't you ever get overwhelmed keeping up with everything?" Melissa jumped in before I could answer. "Oh, absolutely. I worry about you all the time, Mom. Bills, Taxes, bank accounts. It's just so much responsibility for someone your age. Wouldn't it be easier if you let us take some of that off your shoulders? Her tone was sweet, but her eyes glittered with hunger. I cut a piece of bread, slow and steady, before answering. I've managed so far, I said simply. Daniel snorted. Sure, but for how long? Memory slips. Mistakes happen. Remember when you almost forgot to pay the water bill last year? Melissa's laughter chimed in. Or when you called me twice in one day because you couldn't remember if you had already told me something? Adorable, but a little concerning. The table erupted in polite chuckles. I joined them with a smile of my own, though mine carried a different kind of power. I noticed the way their spouses leaned in, nodding along, feeding the fire. I noticed how their voices rose, just loud enough for the grandchildren to hear, planting seeds of doubt in young minds. They wanted me to feel small, to question myself, to see them as saviors swooping in to rescue me from my own incompetence. Maybe, Melissa said, swirling her wine, it's time to think about simplifying things, consolidating accounts, handing over some responsibilities. We'd only be protecting you, Mom, protecting me. The word nearly made me laugh. But I didn't. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin and asked calmly, and you think you're the ones to protect me? Daniel grinned, confident. Of course. Who else? We're your children. It's only natural we look after what's ours. The slip was quick, but I caught it. Asterisk ours. Asterisk not mine. Not earned. Not protected. The arrogance was spilling out faster than they realized. I looked at the faces around me. My children. Their partners, also certain they had cornered me. They saw gray hair, tired eyes, hands that trembled when I lifted my glass. They mistook those signs of age for weakness. They mistook my silence for surrender, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't see the granddaughter watching quietly, remembering every cruel word. They didn't see the fire burning behind my calm expression. They didn't see the plan already in motion, hidden beneath the folds of my quiet smile. The meal carried on, their remarks growing bolder, their attempts at persuasion more transparent. But with every jab, every insult disguised as concern, I felt my resolve strengthen. They thought they were breaking me down, when in truth they were giving me all the proof I needed. I smiled at them, my eyes steady, my voice even, and as their laughter filled the room, I thought to myself, but the more they pushed, the more I smiled, because I already had my plan. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought my smile meant I was too naive to understand the game they were playing. But what they didn't know was that every word they spoke, every smirk across that dinner table, was fuel. And while they laughed, I began to build something they could never see coming. It started with a quiet trip into town, the kind no one noticed. I told them I was going to the pharmacy. Instead, I walked into the office of an attorney who had known me for years, a man who had watched me scrape together pennies to buy my first home, who respected me not as an old woman but as a fighter. When I sat across from him and laid out what my children were planning, his face grew grave. He leaned forward, his voice low. We'll protect everything, he promised. They won't see it coming. And so, we began. One by one, the pieces of my life were secured. Bank accounts were shifted into trusts. Property titles were updated, ensuring they couldn't touch a brick of the house without my say. Wills were rewritten with precision. Every line a shield, every clause a wall they could never climb. I didn't just protect what I had, I fortified it. But the heart of my plan wasn't just legal documents or signatures on paper. It was her, the granddaughter who had whispered the warning, the child with honesty in her eyes when everyone else was blinded by greed. She was young, but she had already proven she had more loyalty than all her parents combined. So when I sat with the lawyer and signed the papers, I placed her name in ink where theirs had once been. Power of attorney, beneficiary, guardian of the legacy I had bled to build. When the ink dried, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully, because I knew. They thought I was a pawn, but I had just crowned myself queen. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. Another family gathering, another meal filled with false laughter. They spoke casually about helping me manage my affairs, their voices thick with entitlement. My eldest son leaned back in his chair, his tone smug. Mom, let's be honest. You can't keep this up much longer. It's time we stepped in. Why don't we talk about transferring the accounts? Melissa nodded eagerly, a smile plastered on her face. Yes, Mom, we'll take care of everything. You'll be free of the stress. They laughed. their spouses nodding along, already tasting the life they believed was theirs. I let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them imagine. And then, slowly, I pushed back my chair and stood. I think it's time I showed you something, I said. The room fell silent. Forks paused midair. All eyes turned toward me as I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. The lawyer's letterhead gleamed at the top of the page. Daniel frowned. What's this? I opened it with calm hands. It's what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. Their eyes scanned the words, and I watched their faces shift. From arrogance, to confusion, to disbelief, and finally to rage. Line by line, the truth unfolded. The house was locked in trust, untouchable, the accounts safeguarded, the wills rewritten with no loophole for their greed to exploit. And in bold ink, the name that replaced theirs, my granddaughter's. Melissa's face went pale. What? What is this? She stammered. It's protection. I said simply, not for me, for what I built. For the only one in this room who cared enough to tell me the truth. Daniel slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. You can't do this. We're your children. I met his glare with steady eyes. And yet you forgot what it means to be family. You wanted to take, not protect. You wanted to strip me of dignity, not honor it. Family isn't blood, Daniel. It's loyalty. And I rested my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder, showed me more loyalty in a single whisper than you have in your entire life. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of Melissa's glass trembling against the table. Their spouses exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to scold. The document spoke louder than I ever could. Every signature was a reminder that I had not only survived their schemes, but I had beaten them at their own game. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my granddaughter, her eyes wide with awe, whispered, Grandma, you really did it. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from winning a war you were never supposed to fight. Yes, my dear, I did. If you had been there, you would have felt it. The shift in the air, the collapse of their arrogance. They weren't laughing anymore. Their pale faces looked almost comical. And I thought to myself, how the world would have roared with approval if they had seen it. Because moments like this aren't just family dramas. They're victories that echo far beyond the walls of a home. I can already imagine the headlines, the hashtags, the viral clips if someone had recorded it. Asterisk hashtag grandma wins. Hashtag reverse inheritance. Hashtag respect your elders. Asterisk social. Media would have feasted on this side of greedy. Children outplayed by the very woman they underestimated. Millions would have cheered, saying, that's the most satisfying revenge I've ever seen. And maybe that's the beauty of it. Because my story isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or treated like they were too small to fight back. So let them rage. Let them stew in the bitterness of a plan that crumbled before their eyes. I had already secured what mattered. I had already handed power to the next generation. Not the greedy one, but the loyal one. The truth was clear. I had struck back, and I had won. And this was only the beginning of the shockwaves they would feel. The silence that followed the reveal didn't last long. My children erupted like a storm unchained. Daniel's face flushed red, his voice booming as he shouted across the table. You've betrayed us, Mom, after everything we've done for you. His wife tugged at his sleeve, embarrassed by the volume, but he tore his arm free, rage spilling over like boiling water. Melissa's voice cracked as she spat accusations. You're letting a child manipulate you. You're senile. You don't even know what you're signing. Their fury filled the room, but the more they screamed, the calmer I became. Their anger wasn't power. It was desperation. Every raised voice, every finger pointed was nothing more than the sound of a crumbling empire. My granddaughter sat frozen beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly, her eyes wide, and though fear trembled in her small fingers, she also saw what I saw. They were exposed. Word of our confrontation traveled faster than wildfire. Within days, whispers spread beyond the walls of my house. Cousins called, asking, is it true? Did you really cut them out? Neighbors exchanged knowing looks across garden fences, their voices dripping with gossip. Did you hear? Her own children tried to rob her blind, and she turned the tables on them. What once was my private heartbreak became public scandal. And in a community where respect for elders was sacred, my children's greed was the ultimate sin. Old friends shook their heads, muttering about how entitlement had rotted the younger generation. Relatives who once bent over backward to please Daniel and Melissa suddenly grew cold, distancing themselves from this shame. It was as though the mask had been ripped off, and no one wanted to be caught standing beside the villains of the story. But it didn't stop with whispers in kitchens or murmurs after Sunday service. No. The story leapt into the age of screens. Someone who had been at that fateful dinner must have told a friend, who told another, until the tale made its way onto Facebook posts and TikTok clips. Grammy outsmarts greedy kids blared across timelines. Meme after meme appeared, showing silver-haired warriors with captions like asterisk, "Don't play chess with someone who's been playing longer than you've been alive." On Twitter, the hashtags trended. Hashtag respect your elders, hash grandma wins, hash reverse inheritance. Strangers rallied behind me, their comments fierce and celebratory. This is the energy we need. In 2025, one person wrote, another declared, protect her at all costs. My children had wanted to silence me, to strip me of dignity. But instead, they became the internet's latest cautionary tale. And in our own neighborhood, the fallout was worse for them than they could have ever imagined. At the grocery store, eyes followed Melissa with quiet judgment. Daniel's co-workers whispered in the break room, mocking the arrogance he once wore so proudly. People who once envied them now pitied them, their reputations stained with greed they could never wash away. Still, none of that stopped them from fighting me directly. They called, they texted, their words dripping with venom. "We'll undo this," Daniel threatened. "You don't know what you've started." Melissa's messages were no softer. "You're destroying this family. When people find out the truth, they'll hate you. Not us." But they were wrong. The truth was already out, and the world had chosen its side. Yet even as I sat in the eye of the storm, watching their pride collapse, I knew it wasn't over. Greed doesn't die quietly. When it's cornered, it claws. And sure enough, one evening a letter arrived in my mailbox. Thick paper, official seal, words stamped across the top that made my heart pause. It was from the court, and as I read the first lines, my breath caught. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was legal. The gossip, the memes, the whispered judgments, they were only the beginning. The real shock came when the court stepped in. The courtroom was cold, silent, and heavy with tension. My children sat on one side, their lawyers whispering hurried strategies. I sat on the other, my granddaughter's hand folded tightly into mine. She was small compared to the towering walls around us, but her presence gave me strength no attorney could provide. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, shuffled papers and looked across the room. "This case," she began, "is not about money. It is about intent, about whether an elderly woman was coerced, or whether she acted with clarity and free will." Her words hung like a sword above us. My children shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One by one, the evidence was laid out. The documents I had signed with my lawyer, the witnesses who testified that I had understood every word, the recordings of my children's heated threats when they thought no one else was listening. Every detail cut through their narrative like sunlight burning through fog. Their case, built on arrogance and entitlement, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Melissa's face twisted with disbelief as the judge repeated my words from that meeting with my attorney. Asterisk, I know exactly what I am doing. I am protecting myself and rewarding the only person who warned me when others tried to take advantage. Asterisk, Daniel lowered his head, his jaw clenched tight, his pride leaking out of him like air from a punctured balloon. And then came the verdict. The judge's voice was steady, unflinching. "The court finds that the plaintiff acted with full capacity and understanding. Her estate planning is valid. The challenges are dismissed." A gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder, final and undeniable. For a moment, time froze. My children sat in stunned silence, their ambition turned to ash. My granddaughter squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with tears. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Walking out of that courtroom, I realized something profound. Family is not guaranteed by blood. Blood ties can be twisted by greed, poisoned by entitlement. True family is measured by loyalty, respect, and love. My granddaughter, the one voice who spoke truth when everyone else plotted, had proven that. In the end, I did not win because of lawyers, documents, or even the law itself. I won because dignity cannot be stolen, wisdom cannot be silenced, and love real, selfless love will always stand taller than greed. As the world watched, as neighbors whispered, as strangers on social media turned me into a symbol, I felt something larger than myself rising from the ashes of betrayal. I was not just an old woman fighting for survival. I was every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed aside because someone thought their time had passed. And in that moment, walking down those courthouse steps with my granddaughter by my side, I carried more than a legal victory. I carried a universal truth that strength lives not in wealth, but in integrity. That even when those closest to you betray your trust, you can rise, you can protect yourself, and you can pass on something more powerful than money, a legacy of courage. So when people ask me how I found the will to fight, my answer is simple. I fought because they thought I wouldn't. I fought because they assumed age meant weakness. And I fought because the little hand that squeezed mine reminded me that someone was watching, learning what love looks like when it refuses to surrender. And those are the victories that echo the loudest. Not the battles won in court, but the wisdom passed down across generations. In the end, dignity triumphed over greed, and that will always be the greater inheritance. Grandma, my parents are going to take all your money. Those whispered words were the spark that lit everything that followed. What began as a hushed warning in a quiet living room grew into a storm of betrayal, a battle in court, and finally, a victory that proved something greater than wealth itself. I look back now and see how close I came to losing not just my savings, but my dignity. Greed nearly swallowed the people I once trusted most, but it never touched the strength I had built from a lifetime of struggle and sacrifice. In the end, resilience carried me further than fear ever could. And as I walked down those courthouse steps with my granddaughter by my side, I knew the truth had finally won. Because family is not measured by who shares your blood, but by who shares your respect, your loyalty, and your love. That is the real inheritance, the one no greedy hand can ever steal. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever felt pushed aside or dismissed, let this story remind you. Dignity cannot be erased, wisdom cannot be silenced, and justice, though sometimes delayed, always finds its way. If you believe dignity will always win over greed, share this story. Spread it so others know they are not alone. And if you want more stories where justice rises from betrayal, where wisdom triumphs over arrogance, and where truth stands taller than lies, then subscribe. Join this community, because together, we are stronger. And remember this, money fades, power crumbles, but dignity, that is forever.